least 50% coverage by the end of this year.
By the end of this year, okay. Yeah. And in relation to the figures that we talked earlier on about, the 15,807 figure, and you said we'll get figures for more recent executions of that. How are those people picked?
These would have been people who had attended to sign on, or sorry, attended to make a claim in the first instance, and would have been invited to an interview.
Okay, because I'm conscious that when we talk about the live register, there is a very different composition of that figure. You'll have some people that are in and out of it for a short period of time, as you referred to earlier on, and you'll have some people that have been on it for quite a while. That figure there of 15,807, are the individuals selected so that it broadly represents the composition of the live register? Or do we just look at people, for example, who are coming onto the live register for the first time and have recently come onto it?
It's not a random sample,
okay.
Sorry, Deputy, if I could, but I've no doubt that there are people representing each of the different cohorts within that number, because of the fact that we haven't got intro services rolling out right across the country as yet. What we're doing, and I suppose the whole thrust of what we're doing, is when somebody comes to initially make a claim from us, we profile them. We conduct a profile which is based on a model that was developed with the ESRI a number of years ago, in order to get to establish what their predictive exit from the live register, their probability of exit from the live register. So in other words, there are some people who sign on with us who we would expect to be only a very short time customers of ours, who will, under their own steam, under their own efforts, will move on to employment or move on in different directions very quickly. For others, they're more vulnerable, and for others, again, there are underlying issues that maybe have to be dealt with in order to allow them move into a different employment sector. The profiling scores people in that base and gives this probability of exit score. Yeah. And what our focus on in our intro services in the first instance will be on those who have a low probability of exit. In other words, those who are in most need of support. Okay. So those who are most in need of support will be the ones that we will engage with in the first instance. Medium need of support immediately afterwards, and high need of support. We will really only actively engage with them if they actually stay on our books longer than we would have otherwise expected them to stay on our books, if you understand me.
I understand.
So that is the model that we're operating to. Now, obviously, within that, we also have a new dimension, which is a further dimension, which is obviously that we have a significant number of customers who are long-term unemployed, that we don't have this profile information for, and that's something that we're looking to address over the course of this year, and that with a view to giving us the data to allow us engage with the current stock of long-term unemployed. Sorry, that sounds awful, but if you understand me, the people who are there, who've been there for quite some considerable time, to see how can we assist them in terms of activation and assist them in terms of helping them progress off the live register.
Okay, just to move on to a different area and to come back to a theme that people have touched on in relation to fraud. I just want to make reference to a document that you shared with us, your Fraud Initiative 2011-2013, Progress Report 2012. And you referred to the enhanced legislation that was brought in under the Social Welfare and Pensions Act 2012, some of the additional powers that were made available to that. One of the additional powers that was made available was the ability of social welfare inspectors to exercise certain functions at ports and airports to deal with the what's known as welfare tourism. Could you give us an update, if you can, what impact this initiative has had to date?
Well, it has been significant insofar as it has given us a whole new dimension and a whole new tool. We've probably concentrated a lot of our activity for a number of different reasons at particular airports, particularly Cork, simply as a kind of in a sense of to get some information, to get some understanding as to how this process would work and how effective it can be. What the powers involved allow inspectors to attend if the inspector has reasonable grounds to suspect that somebody is either leaving the country who has been has been engaged in fraud, or attending the country to perpetuate fraud, and to question such people. So we've had, I mean, since this came into place in June of 2012, we've had about 50 detections using these powers. Dublin, Cork and Shannon, predominantly Cork, as I say. It's about half and half between Dublin and Cork and Shannon, but a lot of the initial work in this space was done in Cork. There's about 36 cases under investigation as well. So it's a substantial piece of activity for our colleagues in SIU.
Okay, so it's been 50 cases since it came in.
Yeah.
And has it been rolled out fully then? You mentioned it started off initially in Cork to see how it could work, but it's operational now across all of our major airports. What about ports? Is it the same there?
We haven't engaged in the ports to the same extent. We have, I think, conducted one. There's been one issue, but it is, I mean, what we're trying to do again is, this year, what we're trying to do is target, and I mean, obviously the powers are prescribed, so the inspector has to have a suspicion in relation to the people who are coming and going.
In relation to the additional power of inquiry in relation to landlords by social welfare inspectors, can you give an update on if that has been successful?
Again, it is, in some instances, it is to reflect the inquiry issues related that Deputy O'Dowd was raising with me about top-up and rents. I don't have a figure to hand. I'm not sure if we've recorded the exact, but I'll certainly try and find out for you.
Okay, if that figure could be supplied, I'd be grateful. In relation to the macro figure that we discussed in relation to overall fraud detection, if we could put up table 23.13, please, onto the screen. Here we go, which is from the Controller in the General Report. Because I think it's important to differentiate between different payments here. You supplied to us a report in relation to child benefit, for example, and that showed that the levels of fraud in relation to child benefit were actually next to nil after what appeared to be a very extensive investigation of it, of a large sample. And we can see here for the different groups there are varying levels of irregular payments. Now, the one thing that caught my eye in relation to this is the value of reinstated or transferred claims. So if you look at one-parent family payment, for example, or look at disability allowance, so 2.1% of these claims were assessed as being fraud, specifically fraud, as opposed to an irregular welfare payment. And out of those, 0.9% were reinstated or transferred. But if they're frauds, why would you reinstate a payment to that person or transfer it if we've evidence of them intentionally looking to defraud the state?
One of the things that we have to recognise is that most of the schemes that the Department operates are based on statute, which prescribe the eligibility. So somebody can become maybe not eligible for a particular payment, but indeed become eligible for a different payment. So regardless of their history, I mean, where the fraud piece kicks in is if there was an overpayment raised against the person, that overpayment will obviously be recovered from the new payment that they're on. But there is no doubt that there is, somebody, for example, maybe the easiest example, if somebody who's in receipt of one-parent family payment is, because of an investigation, is found no longer to be eligible to receive that, they may very well become eligible for receipt of job seekers benefit, or they may become a dependent on a partner who is in receipt of job seekers benefit. So, there is another payment. So regardless of the circumstances around their initial claim, which was found to be fraudulent, if they satisfy the conditions in law that entitles them to a different payment, well, then they're entitled to that different payment. And where the fraud piece comes in is in recovery of the overpayment, rather than diminishing their entitlement to the new payment, if you understand me.
I get you. It does strike me, though, I mean, if you look at the figures here in relation to one parent, 6.7%, two-thirds of people who were, two-thirds of these cases who were found to be involved in fraud, then received that payment, or the equivalent of that payment in another way.
Well, it may not be necessarily the same.
Payment.
It may not be the same
Sure.
payment. The other piece, sorry, Deputy, which is important in this space, and particularly in the context of disability allowance, is that somebody may make a further claim and produce more evidence to show that their circumstances have changed from the time the investigation took place.
Sure, but that wouldn't be fraud.
No, but sorry, they may have fraudulently claimed at a point in time, but they may make a different claim at a different point. Do you know what I mean? And be reinstated because they're able to produce different evidence. Or indeed, they may appeal the decision that is made, which has cut them off or which has determined them to have been fraudulently claiming. They may appeal, and the appeals officer may make a different decision. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of safeguard exists in social welfare law for people.
Yeah, it does go back to some of the discussion that we were having earlier on, though, in relation to deterrence as well, though. Because I can understand the point you're making. I accept that. And like, for example, I'm encouraged to see that in relation to medical ineligibility, and I deal with this an awful lot myself, that if there was an issue in relation to medical ineligibility, that the reinstatement rate is so high. Because what I tend to find happen is that somebody, they supply additional information, they, unfortunately, in some cases, their condition might deteriorate, and then that results in a different decision. And that's the way the system should work. I understand that. I also understand that clearly where there's error. Of course, that makes sense as well. But it is just striking that if somebody goes out to defraud the state, it's measured here, which has had a big discussion about it, that, for example, in relation to disability, nearly half of them who we know are trying to defraud the state then get a payment back from the state anyhow, even though we know they tried to defraud the state earlier on.
Indeed, but I do indeed, but based on, I mean, bear in mind that what that table doesn't capture, I suppose, is, and it gets back to one of the earlier points, if the fraud was a serious fraud, that person certainly is in risk of being prosecuted, okay, albeit that it's a very small proportion of cases that ultimately become prosecuted, but they certainly are at risk of being prosecuted, regardless of their eligibility for a different social welfare payment or not, because their eligibility is distinct, it's different. The second point is that if through their efforts, whether it be fraud or error, there's an overpayment raised against them, they are liable to have that overpayment recovered. It's not as if they start from a clean sheet. So the other piece, I suppose, that I would point is that this is reporting on the fraud and error surveys. So I suppose what I should say is this is suspected fraud. So this is, like it is the deciding officer or the inspector has made a judgment on the basis of the evidence available to them and said this is suspected fraud or suspected error. And I mean, sometimes there can be a fine line between the two in terms of whether somebody deliberately has withheld information from us or has simply forgotten to give us information. And there could be two different judgments in relation to that. And the reinstated, I mean, that person, if their claim is terminated or reduced, they have the opportunity to appeal. The appeals officer, who rehears all evidence presented, may make a different determination, which might lead to the case being reinstated. So albeit that the deciding officer might have come to a view that there was fraud in a case, that may not necessarily be echoed by the appeals officer. Now, I can't give you a value for the proportion within that. But one of the things, I suppose, within the social welfare system is the social welfare system is designed to provide income where an income need has been established based on particular contingencies or situations. So somebody may not fit a particular scheme, they may be defrauding that scheme, but their circumstances may dictate that in fact they have an entitlement in a different part of the social welfare code, and that is separately legislated for and provided for. Okay. So we have to respect that.
Okay, well, we went through that point then, and I'll just conclude with one final question in relation to an area, which is in relation to the rollout of the public service card. Could you just give the committee an update on where that stands at the moment?
Sure. We went into full production after a very intense period of organising ourselves and the logistics and equipping our offices and all the rest. We have a situation where we have somewhere in the order of 80 to 90 stations where we can capture image for face-to-face issuance of public service card, and we have 2 dedicated public service card centres in Dublin at this point, one in Gandon House and one in North Cumberland Street. To date, we have approximately 160,000 public service cards issued. Our target for this year is 600,000 in 2013 and 900,000 in 2014. There are 2 methods of registering somebody to Safe Level 2, which is what it generates a public service card. The first is the face-to-face, and the second is a reduced process where we use information that's currently held by the state, for example, the Passport Office, and prospectively the National Transport Authority in the context of driving licences. So if somebody has satisfied the safe protocols in terms of verified their identity, provided the image to the level of security that required, that is, the accepted safe level, we will accept that data and, subject to some security questions and all the rest, issue a public service card on the back of that. So, as I say, the target for this year is 600,000 cards, 900,000 cards next year. At that stage, what we would expect to be working with other agencies in terms of further use of the public service card in order to generate the demand for the card, for want of a better word. Obviously, the card has a particular use in the context of somebody being a customer of our department. It has huge potential to be of use in terms of being customers of other agencies, and obviously in terms of accessing services provided by other agencies.
Sure. And I'll just conclude on that point. I mean, it's a regular theme here of our hearings regarding the need to integrate the information that different agencies have. And it does appear to me that a massive potential driver of improvement in that area will be the rollout of this card. And that's to be much welcome. So I'll leave it at that. And again, thank you for your presentation this morning, and thanks for the work of all of your departments.
Thank you.
Yeah, just going back to the table that you were asking about, Deputy Donoghue, the results that came through from those 3 surveys came through in June 2012, and we didn't have an opportunity to look into the detail of it or to look behind it. But it is something that we do want to do a piece of work, and obviously there's another survey which has been completed since then again. So I would envisage coming back to this and maybe reporting again just on the detail and that new concept of reinstatement or transferred claims and the implications of
You notice that it says that it's unaudited.
Exactly.
Is that what you're referring
That's
to?
what
there?
I was referring to there.
Okay.
So we will report again.
So how will that work? Will we be coming out with another table with...
Unfortunately.
No,
As Deputy...
I like tables.
As Deputy O'Donnell said, I think I've been listening to this as long as I've been here, and, we write about this issue every year.
Yeah, but this table is the core of it all. So
It is, yeah.
Up. Okay, look, thanks very much.
Mr. Donoghue, do you have a risk officer and a financial officer in the department?
We have a risk management process within our corporate services division. So, in a sense, John, who heads our finance division, also has responsibility for that area of corporate services, and we have an integrated risk management system. And there's
so
a number.
Mr. Conlon here is the
newly appointed, I have to say, Chairman. Sorry, as in Mr. Conlon has just recently joined the department.
And he's responsible for risk.
He's responsible insofar he is responsible for oversight and rollout of the risk management system within the department.
And from a financial point of view, then have you a financial?
He is also the head of our finance unit.
Right. I want to turn to the free travel scheme. How many people use the free travel scheme?
There is, sorry, Chairman, if you bear with me for 1 second. There are approximately 1.1 million customers with some free travel eligibility, of which about 745,000 customers have direct eligibility. As you'll be aware, for some
many users, how do you monitor the use of this scheme?
For the predominant amount of the scheme, the usage isn't monitored currently, but the public service card will facilitate usage monitoring.
So
And
the
that would be for
travel
usage.
scheme up to now has never been monitored?
No, it has been monitored previously, Chairman, insofar as the free travel scheme that was put in place was originally, the kind of funding for it was based on ridership surveys, and those surveys, the last such survey in relation to the predominant area or predominant beneficiary of the scheme, which is CIE, took place in October 1973. So it has been quite some time, as you'll appreciate, since a ridership survey has been conducted there, and since that there have been very many changes to the scheme in terms of extending the benefits, including in 2006, where there had been restrictions on when people could avail of free travel.
Go there in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
You pay 61 million
Yes,
to CIE in 2011.
yes.
Based on what?
It's based on an estimate of passenger numbers, and it's based on, certainly for the last 3 years, it's been based on a budgetary cap that has been imposed by government.
No, but you based it on passenger numbers,
An estimate.
on the guesstimate, or the
Yeah.
estimate.
It's an estimate,
And
yeah.
that estimate, or that survey, was last conducted
In 1973. Yes. Now that's in relation to CIE. What I would say, Chairman, in relation to
No,
all...
no, I'm not going away from that yet.
All right,
I
sorry,
want to stick
sorry.
with CIE for a minute. So 1973, based on what happened then, with some, I think, work on it in between time, but not much, you pay CIE 61 million. Or you pay, 61 million total as a scheme.
Yes.
Are you satisfied with that? Are you getting value for money?
I would think that we are getting value for money because the actual scale of benefits and the number of beneficiaries has increased very dramatically since that ridership survey was
But you
conducted
don't
in
know how many people
1973.
go on that.
No, we don't, and we don't, at the moment, we
How
don't,
can you be satisfied then that you're getting value for money?
because the payments have been capped, Chairman. The level of payment has been capped for the last 3 years, and in fact when the actual benefits under the scheme have been increased.
But nobody knows. You can cap it, you can have a rolling figure each year, whatever you want to do with it, but you don't know how many use it.
Not at the moment, no.
Well, then how do you know you're getting value for money?
Uh,
Even
on-
though you cap it, even though you cap it.
On the basis,
You don't-
as I say, Chairman, it is on our judgment that the benefits availing or the benefits available under the scheme have increased very substantially at no particular additional cost, and the number of beneficiaries have increased substantially.
But you,
But what
you
the-
don't know, even though they benefit by an increased service and as an increased number, you don't know what percentage of that number actually use the various services.
Currently, we don't, no, Chairman.
So then how can you then deduct that you're getting value for money?
What I'm saying, Chairman, is that based on what we did know, and based on the
1973.
extension of passenger numbers and the services available, and based on our interactions with CIE, who would have for quite some time be contending that they are underpaid based on their assessment of the use of services.
But you wouldn't
But
expect them
what-
to say anything else.
Probably not. But what will make a difference, in fact, is the public service card, because based on the rollout of the public
I
service
understand
card,
that. That's
we
in the
will
future.
have absolute information.
That's in the future.
Indeed.
I'm concerned about the fact that you're basing these figures on a usage survey which was conducted in 1973. And even though you've added numbers, there was still no usage survey carried out.
Not on a joint basis. CIE carry out theirs. I can't answer that, Chairman. I don't know.
You're the Secretary General of the Department.
Well, I can't answer why there haven't been
But you're
surveys.
paying them 61 million of taxpayers' money.
Indeed.
Are you not concerned that you don't know?
Yes, which is why we're rolling out the public service card in order to get valid
that's
information.
For the future. I'm talking about when did this concern dawn upon you and the department? You've been paying this for years. And did someone not think of, what gets counted gets done? Should we not count the number of people that are part of this service? And therefore, are we getting value for money? Or are we just relying on the discomfort expressed by CIE and the other group, or the companies involved, that they're not getting enough, that would inform you that maybe you're getting value for money?
I think, Chairman, the assurances that we get are from the fact that the number of beneficiaries have increased very substantially. So whether people choose to avail of the services is an added dimension that I would absolutely wish we had better information on. But the scheme is there, the facility is there for people to avail of it. The type of service has improved enormously in terms of both the extension to eradicate the peak travel restrictions, the extension to bring in other modes of transport. Those things would all provide some assurance, albeit not to the level that you're asking me.
I'm shocked that you will continue to pay those companies that level of money and simply not know the numbers that you're dealing with. That somebody within the department who's responsible for this would continue to allow it to go unchecked to a degree, because if you check it, you might find you're paying too little or too much. That's a difficulty that you might have. But to say that you actually you don't know.
In relation to CIE, I don't have passenger journey numbers. No, I have an estimate from CIE of what they have. I agree, Chairman, but there's, until such time as we have the infrastructure in place to record the passenger survey numbers, I won't have an exact figure in that regard. But what I do have is I know how many people are eligible to benefit under the scheme, and I know the services that CIE are required to deliver to those people.
Like I'm quoting here figures that were paid directly to CIE in 2011 of 61 million. But in fact, the scheme cost 76 million in 2011. So private operators presumably would take up the balance of the 61 versus the 76.
Private operators, yes, including Lewis.
And how do you count?
They're done on the basis of ridership surveys.
When was the last ridership survey done?
They're on an ongoing basis.
But why isn't it on an ongoing basis then with CIE?
I think it's the scale of that, Chairman, and I think it has always been an issue in relation to how we measure that.
But you don't measure it. You're relying on figures dating back to 1973. I'm sorry for labouring this, but I would have thought that there was a very clear audit in terms of the numbers that we're using it, so you can relate it to the amount that you're actually paying somebody. But to think that you're paying the company 61 million and there is no real figures.
Well, sorry, Chairman, I absolutely accept your point in terms of us not understanding and not having detailed figure in terms of the usage. But what we do have is an absolute figure in relation to the number of beneficiaries and to the extent of the service that's to be provided. So there is a dimension missing. I know exactly what you're saying. But the critical thing is about actually being able to provide the service and the numbers of people who are actually accessing that.
Yeah,
and we have very clear information
here
on that.
at the Public Accounts Committee is how you spend taxpayers' money and how it's accounted for. That is a critical thing for me that I have to be concerned about. And I would like to rely on the fact that departments in general count what they're doing and have a return and a proper audit trail and proper figures to substantiate the payments that are being made. And I don't see that here. In terms of the extension to the free scheme regarding eligibility, I see here where you bought out at a negotiated amount. Can you explain that to me?
This would have been at the time when the previously, before 2006, as I understand it, there were parameters within which people with a free travel pass could access public transport for free. In other words, it was non-peak travel. At the time in 2006, when that limit was lifted, there was a negotiation with CIE, I understand.
And what was the figure that you paid them?
I don't have that figure to hand, Chairman. I can find that for you.
Can someone?
I mean, it's 2006, Chairman. I'd have to look back and see.
Was it a substantial figure?
I don't think so, Chairman. In the scheme of things, I think it was a modest adjustment, but I mean, that's as much as I know. I really would have to, rather than try to give you an incorrect figure, we could give you an exact figure at the, in terms of what that negotiation was.
And when are you likely then, this card that we're talking about, when is that likely to deliver
Well,
the
we
type
will.
of information that we require to understand the payment that's being made?
The delivery of the free travel variant of the card, in other words, the card that will have the chip that will allow people access integrated transport, we will be issuing those cards before the end of this year. It will take us some time to deliver them to the whole free travel population, but we will certainly, based on that, we should be getting usership data, even on a sample basis, before the end of this year.
Has CIE indicated to you what they believe you should be paying for the scheme?
My information is that they have been certainly looking for considerably more, but I'm not privy to the detail of that. I mean, again, I can find that out, Chairman.
Can we find that out?
Yeah.
We'll see what they count, if they count. And we can then compare the figure that you're paying and what they expect you to pay.
Certainly, as I say, I don't have briefing with me, Chairman, in relation to what those discussions were and what the basis of the argument is, except to know that they certainly feel they are being underpaid for the services they deliver, particularly in the light of the cap that was imposed.
Would your internal audit team, would they have done any work on this?
Certainly not in the recent past, but again, I would have to check with my head of internal audit as to when this would most recently have been audited.
As well?
Yes.
The fraud on the scheme. Is there fraud in that scheme?
Again, it's certainly suggested by some of the operators, including CIE, that there is fraud. Again, the public service card is considered to be one of the main deterrents of fraud, because the person availing of the service, there will be a picture on the public service card.
According to the figures here, an average of 10 to 20 passes are confiscated a day by Irish Rail. And Bus Éireann confiscate around 50 passes a month. And Dublin Bus issued 488 penalties for misuse. And I'm trying to factor this into the figure that we're paying to the companies for the service, and wondering, what's the level of fraud and what's the figure that you put on that fraud within the figure that we're paying them. But you wouldn't be able to give me that either.
No, because obviously it's the company who are delivering the service and can assess what they perceive to be the level of fraud.
And what's the cost to the company? Can we find that out? What cost do they put on fraud in relation to the scheme?
We wouldn't have that information, Chairman, but I mean, we can certainly ask the company to establish that for you.
What would your risk manager say about this?
I think that in the scheme of the 20.1 billion, this would, obviously there's a risk attached to it because we don't have complete information on it. But there are other risks within the department that, potentially provide higher risk for us.
Which brings me to another point. And I'm really shocked at the information that you're giving us today, or the lack of information. And I would ask, in relation to the questions that were asked, which I think were reasonable in the terms of management of a scheme, that we would get that information as soon as possible, that we would get the information from CIE as soon as possible. Because this needs to be sorted out, and some sort of audit needs to be conducted in relation to the expenditure of taxpayers' money to the tune of €76 million on that scheme. I want to relate that, or this 71 or 76 million, to the other comments about how you relate either the write-off of 5 million or this 76 million separately, a different scheme, and the other fraud and errors that go on in the department. Yeah, and you relate it to the overall spend of 20.7 billion, and it represents some sort of low percentage of that overall spend. And I don't see it that way, I have to tell you. I've listened to your exchanges with the various members here. I don't see it that way. I see it in the context of a huge amount of money that is going to waste out of the department, and that is, by and large, poorly accounted for. I don't relate it to the overall sum that you're spending. And I make the presumption that you have enough checks and balances in place that will completely minimise this. So therefore, I don't minimise the amount by relating it to the greater amount, because it's taxpayers' money. We should be concerned about every red cent of it, and we don't seem to be. And to go back to the fraud, which I want to come to again in my questions later, I find the level of fraud to be too high, and I think that the part of it that is in the over 5-year category, or in terms of the debt to the department, is quite a lot of money. And I think that there should be greater management of it. Because last year was the same story. And the department, if you'll forgive me for saying it, put some sort of spin on these figures, which are not bankable figures at all. We can save in excess of 700 million in terms of fraud. And that is money that would have been paid to recipients of benefits had you not found the fraud. Whereas I like to look at the bankable sum of actually what they took from the state, which was illegal, or the errors which shouldn't have happened in the first place, and that you minimise those, and there isn't enough concentration on it, is what I would suggest.
Chairman, in relation to that, I mean, I already explained in terms of the work that we have done over the course of the last 6 months or so since the report was published, in relation to reissuing guidelines, in taking legal powers in relation to recovery, in terms of training our staff in recovery of overpayments. And while I think that there are extreme difficulties in relation to recouping some of that debt, I would expect us to make significant progress, given that we now have a new basis to do so, and given that we are hopeful of finding other ways of pursuing debt through attachment orders.
Deputy Fleming, in his opening remarks, asked for, I think, a significant amount of information in relation to the debt and other aspects of your spend in that department. And I would suggest that most of the information that you've asked for so far should be there at the ready, and I'd like to see it within a matter of a week to 10 days. I think that that's reasonable to ask you. Can I turn to the services that you would procure within the by the department? At what level do you go out to tender?
It's for the vast majority, I think it's over 25,000.
Over 25,000. And when the tender is awarded, if it's an ongoing rolling service that's transacted by the department each year, how often is that tender revisited? So you award it in 1 year. Is it looked at each year? Is it a tender for 3 years?
It depends on the service, Chairman, and I mean there are a variety of different things. For example, some of the services we would procure because of the size and scale of the department, things like cleaning services or waste management services would be very significant, but you might put a contract in place for 3 or 5 years. Other things would be particularly, specific project-based. In other words, you're contracting for provision of a particular piece of software development or a particular piece of consultancy or whatever the case may be. We have very extensive contracting out arrangements to the value of about €120 million per year, ranging from contracts with branch officers to provide services, to provide claim taking and processing services in 60 different locations, ranging from the contract with An Post to provide payment services, and we're currently evaluating responses to a tender in that regard. And the tender that will be put in place, which will be a very valuable tender, is for an initial period of 2 years with the possibility of extension for a further 2. So it depends on the circumstances.
Are you satisfied that all of those tenders have been reviewed at the end of the appropriate period, be it 2 years, 1 year, 3 years?
We certainly have put in place, I mean, there have been, it would be wrong of me to suggest that there haven't been instances where we have come up against the wire and found ourselves coming up to a contract deadline, but we've put in place structures to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that all contracts are properly based and grounded.
Well, take, for example, the distribution of leaflets.
Right.
You have a contract in place for that? When someone rings up and asks for a particular leaflet to do with the benefit, and it's sent out by a call centre to the person.
I am not familiar with that precise contract, if we have such a contract, Chairman, to be honest, because a lot of forms and leaflets would actually be given either through the Citizens Information Bureau or through Citizens Information Centres or through our local office networks. We would have, we would send a lot of information and a volume of post through the postal services, and we have, altered the way in which we do that to get best value in terms of using the most efficient kind of services there as well, between metered post, where we have files and things moving between offices, or a lot of correspondence moving between offices, so that we've actually gone from particular forms of service provision to other forms where we get better value and more secure services.
You have a call centre for, I think, rehab operator for you.
I don't know, Chairman, I must confess, so I would have to find that out.
Well, if you would, and let us know, as an example of a contract, the value of it when it was last went to tender, that kind of thing.
Certainly, absolutely.
Your financial officer, would that be part of his duty now?
We have a project office, finance as part of it. We have a project office that monitors all the contracts and tendering arrangements. So
I'm asking about the risk officer and the financial officer because other departments don't have them. And in fact, one particular department, when we were reviewing a spend with them, acknowledged that it was a weakness in the department, that there wasn't someone specifically there to deal with risk management. And separate to that there wasn't someone there to deal with the overall financial management, because the qualifications were not generally found within the department. And it surprises me that there isn't a risk manager separate to your financial manager when you're dealing with 20.7 billion euro worth of a spend, and in particular given the systems that you have in place, or indeed the lack of some systems that you within the department, that's not the case.
We have a very heavily integrated risk management system, which is managed, if you like, centrally, reports to the management board, which I chair. It is integrated with business plans. Our principal officers around the department are required to identify the risks and to monitor and report on those risks on a regular basis. And we have a project governance committee which specifically oversees the award of contracts and defining what projects the department will undertake at any particular time. And the project office that supports the project governance committee liaises very closely with the national procurement services, with the legal services in relation to templates and form of contract, with the Department of Finance and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in relation to restrictions that are there, so that we try to monitor the kind of RFT processes and notification processes and award processes in line with best practice. The risk management system that we have in place, it means that we have a very constant highlighting of risk right across all scheme areas in terms of whether that be an operational risk or reputational risk or financial risk. So it's quite a sophisticated system that we have, Chairman.
Can I ask Public Expenditure and Reform, what do you think of the CIE figures?
So the CIE figures.
What do you think of the payment on the free travel scheme, and the lack of real serious data around that scheme?
Well, I think the data that will become available is very welcome, Chairman. I suppose that the usage data is probably the firmest way of building up what you pay for something. It is one approach. I mean, the approach that's been taken historically, I suppose, as you say, since 1973, has been to negotiate the figure, and the government imposed a cap on that. I think it was 3 years ago. Looking at the broad facts, I mean, the numbers availing of that scheme, the numbers eligible for that scheme have really increased quite dramatically, and what they're eligible for has increased quite dramatically over the years. The balance of probability may well be that a per unit charge would cost more than the current overall provision, but as you say, in the absence of the facts which will become available, we don't know that
Are you
yet.
surprised by the lack of analysis in this area going back over the last number of years?
Well,
You know, that the payment seems to have been made without any proper calculation of the numbers, just based on the ones that are eligible and possible usage.
well, I think the approach that has been taken has been to contract for the service for the number of eligible people rather than on the basis of a per usage fee. I think those are the alternatives. It may well be that the per usage approach would give you firmer data, but it clearly has been a negotiated fee, and we would have always been aware of that.
Can I ask a question on that, if I may? It's my understanding, though, that the scheme, the cost of the free travel is the same regardless of the usage of it, isn't it? As it's set up at the moment.
Well, for the last 3 years since government imposed a cap.
Okay, but when somebody gets an entitlement to free travel and they get their card, regardless of how often they use it, at the moment the cost to the taxpayer is unchanged. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the information that we have in relation to how many people are eligible for the scheme is what the cost of the scheme is.
Effectively, yes. Sorry,
At the moment.
that is the dimension that
That's
we
the
have
discussion we're
information
having
on.
here, yeah. Okay, I just want to clarify that.
Okay, is there any other questions? Well, that brings us to the end of our hearing. So I want to thank the witnesses for attending. Is it agreed that the committee dispose of 438 and chapters 21, 22 and 23?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
And the social insurance one. Agreed. Item 8 then is the adjournment until the 21st of March at 10 a.m.